Okay, I'm sorry I didn't get this video up for you yesterday. Just realized that didn't happen. So today you're going to get the other two articles that create the branches of the government. Article 2 is our executive branch. When we think of the executive branch, we tend to think of the president. So it's kind of how things work from the presidential side. A couple of vocabulary words. To pardon is to release someone from being punished for an offense. So you'll hear about presidential pardons. Sometimes you might hear on the news that the governor pardoned somebody or something like that. To impeach is to bring an accusation against a government official. You guys will probably remember this from President Trump's impeachment trial at the beginning of 2020. All it's saying is we're accusing somebody of a crime, but they're a government official, so it goes through different channels. It goes through the legislature. Okay, powers of the executive branch. Currently, our president is Donald Trump. Our vice president is Mike Pence. There are 15 different cabinet members. The cabinet is like the group that advises the president. The job of the executive branch is just to enforce the laws that Congress passes. To be the president, you must be a natural-born citizen of the United States. You have to be at least 35, and you have to have been a resident of the United States for 14 years. Natural-born doesn't mean you have to be born in the United States, because sometimes, like Ted Cruz ran for president at the same time Donald Trump did. He was one of the Republican nominees. Now, he was not born here, but his mom was. She was an American citizen. That makes him an American citizen. So, natural-born citizen of the United States. Same thing with President Barack Obama, natural-born citizen. His father was not an American citizen, but his mother was. So he was able to be president because of that. But you can't live, let's say, in Canada or France or England for your entire life and then come back and be like, I think I want to be president. You have to have been in the United States as a resident for at least 14 years before you become president. Some of the different executive branches are, of course, the Department of Defense, Department of Homeland Security, Department of Education. So there's a bunch of different things that they advise the president on stuff to do. And the president kind of says, okay, these are the laws we're enforcing because that's his job. And he makes sure it's kind of delegating authority. He's making sure the people below him are doing their job and enforcing our laws. What does he do? Well, the president is the commander-in-chief of the armed forces. That means he's in charge of the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, the Marines, the Coast Guard, and all that stuff. He gets to sign legislation into law. Remember, we talked about how a bill becomes a law and it lands on the president's desk after it's voted on. Or he can veto it. Those are his choices. He gets to negotiate treaties and conduct diplomacy with other nations. So he gets to sit down and make agreements with other nations about things like trade and how we're going to behave militarily and stuff like that. He can issue executive orders, which direct executive officers or clarify and further existing laws. What that means is he can issue an order that says, this is something I think we need to do. For example, right now, we have a lot of stuff going on with the monuments as a part of the Black Lives Matter movement. People are wanting monuments to come down to Confederate causes. They're also wanting monuments to come down to people who maybe just are no longer presented in the correct light. They just agreed to take one down outside the Museum of American History of Theodore Roosevelt because it shows him as above a Native American and an African American person. And that was definitely something that was okay in 1940 when it was constructed, not so much anymore. So they're going to take that down and move it. But President Trump has noticed people are being careless at what they're targeting. They're targeting statues of abolitionists because they just don't know. So he has made an executive order that says you cannot vandalize or deface or topple federal monuments. And he's just saying, hey, we're going to protect these things until we decide what to do with them. But he can issue executive orders on all kinds of things. He can extend pardons and clemencies for federal crimes unless the person was impeached. So you find this a lot of times at the end of a president's time in office. They'll pardon some people. when President Nixon had to resign because he did some things that were illegal and he was going to be impeached. President Ford, who was his vice president and became president when he resigned, decided to pardon Nixon for any crimes he may have committed while in office. Since he hadn't been impeached, that was legal. All right. Vice president has some jobs too. Biggest one is he can take over for the president at a moment's notice. There are lots of reasons the president might not be able to perform his duties. Sometimes if the president's having surgery, he's under anesthesia, he's not able to govern the nation, the vice president will step in for a short time. Sometimes the president, like in the case of John F. Kennedy, has been assassinated. Lyndon Johnson took over because the president was no longer with us. And then I mentioned the thing about Nixon when he resigned, President Ford took over for him. He also serves as the president of the U.S. Senate. The vice president is going to cast a deciding vote. Most of the time they stay out of things, but if it's tied, like in the picture I have here, the nomination of Elizabeth DeVos as Secretary of Education, it was tied 50-50. So he cast the vote and made it 51-50 to confirm her as the Secretary of Education. That's the only time he votes in the Senate. Now let's talk judicial branch. Their job is interpret the law. So legislatures passed a law. President signed a law. It's a law. Now they've got to decide, somebody's going to say maybe this is not a constitutional law. Because it's not constitutional, we're going to sue. And the Supreme Court steps in and they decide, hey, is this law acceptable? The vocabulary term for you in this one is jurisdiction. It's the authority to administer justice. We talk about what jurisdiction something is in. So here's what the judicial branch looks like at the federal level. So at the very, very top, Supreme Court. And over here, we've got the current members of the Supreme Court. There are 9. There's no constitutional rule that says how many there have to be. There have been 6, and it's slowly crept up to 9. But the Supreme Court, below that, we've got the armed forces because we have military courts. They're a whole separate thing. And there's a U.S. Court of Appeals for that, and that can go to the Supreme Court. Then we have U.S. courts. Starts at district courts and goes up from there. A lot of times this is civil. A lot of times it's criminal, but can be some civil cases too. Then we have claims court and federal circuit stuff. This is international trade, veterans appeals, different things like that. And then we have state courts. So if you bring a case to trial in Texas and it works its way all the way through the Texas judicial system, goes to the Texas Supreme Court, the next step is the federal Supreme Court. And that's it for the branches of government. Make sure that you pay attention to these things. I'm not going to give you a form Google quiz to fill out today. I just want you to watch the video. Next week, you'll have an assessment on all of the things we've talked about this summer school. So make sure you're looking out for that. And I hope you guys have a great rest of your day.